When you hear the word pirates, what comes to mind? Maybe you think of swashbuckling adventures, treasure maps marked with an X, and epic sea battles on the high seas. Popular culture, from movies to books, has painted a picture of piracy that's romantic, thrilling, and full of freedom. But what if I told you the reality was far darker, more brutal, and steeped in human suffering? For centuries, the sparkling blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea hid a terrifying secret. It was the hunting ground of the Barbary pirates. These weren't the charismatic rogues you see on screen. They were ruthless raiders operating from the coastal states of North Africa, places like Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. Their reign of terror lasted for hundreds of years, from the 1500s all the way into the 1800s. They didn't just attack ships sailing through the Mediterranean. They launched devastating raids on coastal towns and villages across Europe. Imagine living in a peaceful seaside community in Italy, Spain, France, or even as far away as England and Iceland, and waking up to the nightmare of a pirate attack. Their primary goal wasn't gold or jewels. It was people. The Barbary pirates were slave traders on an industrial scale. They captured hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children, dragging them from their homes and ships to be sold in the slave markets of North Africa. This was a massive, organized business, and it shattered countless lives. The stories of these captives are heartbreaking. They were people from all walks of life: fishermen, farmers, merchants, and sailors. They were torn from their families, their culture, and their freedom. Among the most tragic victims were the women. Daughters, wives, and mothers were ripped from their families without warning. Their lives turned upside down in a single horrifying night. Their fate was often grim. Sold into servitude, they faced a life of unimaginable hardship, forced to serve in the households of wealthy merchants or even the harems of powerful rulers. Their identities were stripped away, their hopes for the future extinguished. For many, there was no escape. They would spend the rest of their lives as property, thousands of miles from everyone they had ever known and loved. This wasn't a distant, isolated problem. The Barbary threat was so severe that it crippled trade and terrified entire nations. European powers tried everything to stop them. They paid enormous ransoms, signed treaties which were often broken, and even launched military expeditions. Even the young United States of America found itself at war with the Barbary states in its early years, fighting to protect its citizens and its ships. The famous line from the U.S. Marine Corps hymn, "To the Shores of Tripoli," refers directly to this conflict. So, the next time you see a romanticized pirate adventure, remember the hidden history of the Barbary corsairs. The real story isn't one of glorious adventure, but of a long, dark chapter of violence, slavery, and profound human tragedy. It is a powerful reminder that history is often much more complex and harrowing than the stories we like to tell ourselves. Have you ever heard of pirates who weren't after treasure chests filled with gold and jewels? Instead, their most prized loot was people. For centuries, a terrifying threat lurked in the Mediterranean Sea, a force so powerful they held European nations and even the young United States in a grip of fear. These were the Barbary pirates, from the 16th to the 19th century. The Barbary coast of North Africa, what we know today as Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, was the epicenter of a massive and highly organized piracy operation. These weren't just rogue captains with a ship and a Jolly Roger flag. This was state-sponsored piracy. The rulers of cities like Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli actively supported and profited from these raids. They provided safe harbors, markets for stolen goods, and a system for managing the vast human trade. The Barbary corsairs, as they were often called, were masters of the sea. Their ships, typically galleys, powered by both sails and oars, were fast, agile, and packed with cannons and heavily armed crews. They could easily outmaneuver the slower, bulkier merchant vessels that plied the Mediterranean trade routes. Their hunting grounds weren't limited to the sea, either. They launched brutal raids on coastal towns and villages all along the European coastline, from Italy and Spain to as far north as Ireland, and even Iceland. Imagine living in a quiet fishing village, only to have corsair ships appear on the horizon, bringing fire, chaos, and abduction. The primary goal of these attacks was capturing people. Men, women, and children were rounded up by the thousands. Once captured, they faced a grim fate: They were taken back to the sprawling slave markets of North Africa. Here, their lives were turned upside down. People who were once artisans, sailors, farmers, or nobles were suddenly property, their value determined by their health, skills, and social status. The experience was horrifying. Captives were often forced to march long distances under a brutal sun, chained together. At the markets, they were paraded before potential buyers, inspected like livestock. Families were torn apart, never to see each other again. The wealthy had a sliver of hope. Their families or governments might be able to pay a hefty ransom for their release. Religious orders, like the Trinitarians and Mercy, were even established with the mission of raising money to redeem Christian captives. But for the poor, there was little hope of rescue. They were destined for a life of hard labor. Men were put to work in quarries, on construction projects, or, most dreaded of all, as galley slaves, chained to an oar and forced to row until they collapsed. Women often ended up in domestic servitude or as concubines in a harem, while some captives managed to adapt or even rise in status through conversion or special skills. For most, it was a life of misery with no end in sight. The scale of this operation was staggering. Historians estimate that between the 16th and 19th centuries, over 1 million Europeans were captured and enslaved by the Barbary pirates. This constant threat crippled trade and instilled a deep-seated fear across Europe. European nations tried various strategies to combat the pirates. They paid enormous sums in tribute protection money, essentially to the Barbary states, hoping to buy safe passage for their ships. This rarely worked for long. A new ruler or a new demand would soon arise, and the cycle would begin again. Military action was also attempted. Naval powers like Britain, France, and Spain launched expeditions to bombard pirate strongholds, but these attacks often had limited success. The Barbary states were resilient, and the pirates would simply rebuild and resume their raids. This brings us to the newly formed United States. After gaining independence from Britain, American merchant ships lost the protection of the Royal Navy. They immediately became prime targets. The Barbary pirates saw these new ships, flying a new flag, as easy prey. The capture of American sailors and the demand for tribute became one of the first major foreign policy challenges for the young nation. This conflict led to the creation of the United States Navy and the First and Second Barbary Wars, where the U.S. took a stand against paying tribute and fought to protect its citizens and commerce. So what finally brought an end to this era of piracy? It was a combination of factors. The end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 freed up European navies. A combined Anglo-Dutch fleet launched a massive bombardment of Algiers in 1816, destroying the pirate fleet and forcing its ruler to free thousands of slaves. But the real death blow came with the rise of European colonialism. In 1830, France invaded and conquered Algeria, dismantling the system of state-sponsored piracy for good. As other European powers exerted control over North Africa throughout the 19th century, the age of the Barbary corsairs finally came to a close. The story of the Barbary pirates is a dark and often overlooked chapter of history. It reminds us that piracy wasn't always about buried treasure and adventure on the high seas. For centuries, it was a brutal business built on human suffering, shaping the politics, economies, and fears of nations on both. Imagine stepping back in time to a quiet European coastal village. The salty air fills your lungs, and the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against the shore is the soundtrack to daily life. Here, people lived in harmony with the sea. They were fishermen, mending their nets at dawn, farmers, tending to their small plots of land, and traders, their livelihoods tied to the ebb and flow of the tides. Life was simple, honest, and deeply connected to nature. These villages were idyllic, but they were also incredibly vulnerable. There were no towering stone walls, no formidable fortresses, and certainly no standing armies to protect them. The only defense was the vast, unpredictable ocean itself. And out on that ocean, a constant threat loomed. Picture a misty morning. The sun is just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A fisherman, already out in his boat, squints his eyes. Is that a strange sail on the horizon? He dismisses it as a trick of the light, but the shape grows larger, faster than any merchant vessel. The sleek, dark silhouette of a pirate ship cuts through the waves, its ominous flag a stark contrast to the peaceful dawn. Back in the village, people are just starting to stir. The baker is firing up his oven, the smell of fresh bread beginning to drift through the narrow, cobbled streets. Children are still asleep in their beds. Suddenly, a frantic cry pierces the morning calm. The lone watchman in the rickety bell tower has spotted the approaching danger. The alarm bell begins to clang, a desperate, chaotic rhythm that shatters the morning peace. Panic erupts. Doors are thrown open. People pour into the streets, their faces etched with terror. They run, but where can they go? The pirates are already ashore. They move with a terrifying speed and efficiency, a whirlwind of chaos and violence. They are not here to trade. They are here to take. They storm through homes, their shouts and laughter echoing through the once quiet village. For the villagers, this is a recurring nightmare made real. They grab what they can, a child, a precious family heirloom, and flee towards the hills or the woods, anywhere away from the shore. But the pirates are swift. They are interested in anything of value. Coins, silver, food, livestock, and sometimes people themselves, to be sold into slavery or held for ransom. The attack is a brutal, swift storm. It might last only an hour, but in that hour, a lifetime of work is undone. Homes are ransacked and set ablaze. The smoke and flames a cruel beacon visible for miles. The pirates load their stolen goods onto their ship. Their job done. As quickly as they appeared, they are gone, disappearing back over the horizon, leaving behind a scene of devastation. The surviving villagers slowly trickle back. The sight that greets them is heartbreaking. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of ruin. Their homes are smoldering shells, their possessions scattered and broken. The sense of peace and security is utterly shattered. All that remains is loss and the haunting memory of the attack. They must now face the daunting task of rebuilding their lives from the ashes, all while knowing that the sea that gives them life could at any moment bring death and destruction to their doorsteps. Once again, the fear never truly leaves, becoming a silent, unwelcome resident in their rebuilt home. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to see a pirate ship on the horizon? For many coastal communities centuries ago, it wasn't a thrilling adventure. It was the beginning of a nightmare. Let us peel back the romanticized layers of pirate life and look at the harsh reality of a pirate raid. Forget treasure chests and talky parrots for a moment. The real currency for many pirates, especially those we call corsairs, was people. A typical raid was horrifyingly fast and brutal. It began with the sudden appearance of a ship, often moving much quicker than a merchant vessel. Panic would ripple through the town. There wasn't time to organize a defense, or even to gather your family. The pirates would swarm ashore, armed with swords, axes, and pistols. Their goal was simple: chaos and capture. They'd burst into homes, workshops, and marketplaces. The sounds were of splintering wood, shattering pottery, and terrified screams. In these frantic moments, families were torn apart. A mother might be dragged one way, her children another. Husbands and wives, separated in the violent confusion, would never see each other again. The pirates showed little mercy. They were there for human cargo, and they took anyone they could overpower: men, women, and children. Imagine the scene. The streets filled with smoke, and the cries of people searching desperately for their loved ones. Some residents would try to hide, cramming themselves into cellars, attics, or even barrels. Others, driven by courage or desperation, might grab a farming tool or a kitchen knife to fight back. But what chance did a fisherman with a net hook have against a hardened pirate armed with a cutlass and a firearm? Resistance was almost always futile and often ended tragically. The pirates worked with a cruel efficiency. They would round up their captives, tying them together and forcing them toward the shore. Those who resisted were beaten, or worse. The elderly or infirm, deemed not valuable enough to take, were often left behind amidst the wreckage of their own homes. Within an hour or two, the pirates would be gone, their ships sailing away with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of new captives below deck. For the people taken, the ordeal was just beginning. They were packed into the dark, filthy hold of the ship, bound and given minimal food and water. The journey could last for weeks, with disease and despair running rampant. Their destination was a slave market in a distant port, perhaps along the Barbary coast of North Africa. There, they would be sold like livestock. A skilled craftsman might fetch a high price. A young woman might be sold into a harem. Families were broken up permanently at the auction block. And what about the town left behind? It was a ghost of its former self. The survivors wandered through the ruins, calling out names that would never be answered. The economic heart of the community was ripped out. With so many of its people gone, the town might never recover. The emotional scars, the constant fear of another sail on the horizon, would last for generations. This was the grim reality behind the pirate myths. It wasn't about freedom and adventure on the high seas for everyone. For countless innocent people, pirates were a terrifying force that brought only destruction, loss, and a life of brutal servitude. Understanding this dark side of history gives us a more complete and honest picture of that era. It reminds us that behind the legends, there are real human stories of suffering and survival. Thanks for watching and joining us on this deeper dive into history. Imagine the terror of a sudden raid. For countless women throughout history, this was a devastating reality. Picture a mother holding her child's hand one moment, and the next, being torn away from her family. There were no goodbyes, no las embraces, just the chaos and the shouting of unfamiliar voices. Young girls, their eyes wide with confusion, were herded along with the adults, not understanding why they were leaving their homes or where they were being taken. Their innocence was shattered in an instant. Older women, who had spent their lives building families and communities, watched in horror. Their primary fear wasn't for themselves, but for their children and grandchildren. They saw the faces of their loved ones, etched with fear, and felt a helplessness that cut deeper than any physical wound. As they were forced onto ships, the sounds were a torment. The cries of children, the desperate pleas of husbands and fathers, and the sharp commands of their captors. The most profound suffering often happened in silence. On the decks of those ships, mothers would stare back at the receding shoreline, the place that held every memory they cherished. Silent tears would stream down their faces as they mourned the loss of their past and the terrifying uncertainty of their future. They had been ripped from their world, and every mile the ship traveled was another step into an abyss of the unknown. They clutched whatever they had left, perhaps a small piece of jewelry, or just the memory of a loved one's face, holding on to a sliver of their identity. Compounding this terror was the suffocating wall of language. These women couldn't understand a single word their captors said. The commands, the jeers, the conversations happening around them were all just meaningless, menacing sounds. This barrier created a profound sense of isolation. They couldn't ask where they were going. They couldn't ask what would happen to them. They could not even communicate with other captives who might have been taken from different villages and spoke different dialects. This isolation was a form of psychological torture, leaving them trapped inside their own minds with their worst fears. Think about the sheer courage it took to endure this. Every day was a struggle for survival, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. They had to find a reason to keep going when all hope seemed lost. They drew strength from each other, a shared glance, a quiet touch of a hand, forming new bonds in the crucible of their shared trauma. These were not just passive victims. They were survivors who held on to their dignity and their humanity in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Their stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. These women were daughters, sisters, mothers, and grandmothers. They were the heart of their communities. Their abduction left a gaping hole in the fabric of their societies, a wound that would be felt for generations. The men left behind were without their partners. Children were without their mothers, and entire villages lost their vibrant core. The cultural knowledge, the traditions passed down from mother to daughter, was severed. The long-term impact of these raids was not just the loss of individuals, but the fracturing of an entire way of life. When we look back at history, it's easy to see these events as distant statistics. But each number represents a human being with a story, with a family with hopes and dreams. The stories of these women are a crucial part of our shared human history. They remind us of the devastating cost of conflict and the importance of empathy and understanding. By remembering their suffering and their strength, we honor their memory and learn powerful lessons about compassion and justice. Imagine yourself in a world you can't see, only feel. The floor beneath you isn't steady ground, but the groaning wood of a massive ship, constantly swaying, heaving with the rhythm of an unforgiving ocean. This was the reality for countless souls, packed into the dark, stifling belly of a vessel, a floating prison crossing an endless expanse of water. The journey across the sea was more than just a trip. It was a descent into a nightmare. Down below deck, away from the sun and the sky, space was a luxury none could afford. People were crowded together so tightly that there was barely room to breathe, let alone move. The air was thick and heavy, filled with the sense of fear, sickness, and despair. Every lurch of the ship sent bodies tumbling into one another, a constant, unwanted intimacy with strangers who shared the same terrifying fate. Privacy was a forgotten memory. Dignity was stripped away, layer by layer, with each passing moment. Food and water, the most basic necessities for life, were scarce and severely rationed. What little was provided was often spoiled or barely edible. A small portion of grain, a meager cup of stale water, this was all that stood between a person and starvation. Hunger became a constant, gnawing ache, a dull pain that mirrored the sharp, piercing pain in their hearts. Thirst was a fire in the throat that never went out. Many grew weak, their bodies succumbing to the brutal combination of malnutrition and the relentless stress of their situation. The physical toll was immense, but the mental and emotional anguish was just as devastating. Fear was a constant companion, a shadow that clung to every soul. The unknown future loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. Where were they going? What would happen to them? These questions echoed in the darkness, unanswered, fueling a deep-seated anxiety that ate away at their spirits. The exhaustion was bone-deep, not just from the lack of rest, but from the constant emotional strain of living in a state of high alert. Days bled into nights, and nights into days, with no way to mark the passage of time except for the meager rations and the changing rhythm of the waves. The world became a symphony of sorrowful sounds, the creaking of the ship's timbers, the relentless crashing of waves against the hull, and woven through it all, the soft, heartbreaking sounds of human suffering. There were quiet sobs that broke the silence, muffled cries from those overwhelmed by grief, and whispered prayers sent up into the darkness, pleas for mercy, for strength, for an end to the torment. Yet, even in this abyss of despair, the human spirit flickered. Small embers of resilience began to glow in the darkest corners of the hold. It was often the women who fanned these flames. They had lost everything: their homes, their families, their freedom, but they refused to lose their humanity. In hushed tones, they would begin to speak, their voices a fragile thread of connection in the overwhelming isolation. One woman might start by sharing a memory of her village, describing the way the sun felt on her skin in the morning or the taste of a favorite fruit from a tree she had planted herself. Her story would act as a key, unlocking a door in another's mind. Soon, another voice would join in, recalling the songs her mother used to sing, humming a few notes of a forgotten lullaby. These weren't just stories. They were acts of rebellion. They were a refusal to be defined by their current suffering. By sharing these memories of home, they were keeping their identities alive. They were reminding themselves and each other that they were more than just captives. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, and friends. They were people with a past, with a culture, with a life that mattered. These shared moments of remembrance were a powerful balm for their wounded souls. They created a small, sacred space where their spirits could find a brief refuge from the horror surrounding them. In this shared vulnerability, they found a strange and powerful strength. They would comfort those who were sick, offering a gentle touch or a soothing word. They would hold those who wept, sharing the burden of their sorrow. Hope, in this place, was not a grand, shining beacon. It was a small, fragile thing, passed from one person to another like a secret. It was the belief that as long as they remembered who they were, a part of them remained free. This fragile hope, nurtured in the darkness below deck, became their shield, their only protection against the crushing weight of despair. It was the quiet, unyielding proof that even when everything else is taken, the human spirit can endure. Thank you for joining me on this reflective journey. If this story moved you, please consider liking. Imagine being ripped from your home, your family, your entire world. For countless individuals throughout history, this terrifying thought was a brutal reality. After a harrowing journey across seas and deserts, they arrived in North Africa, not as travelers, but as property. The moment their feet touched this new land, their old lives vanished forever. Freedom, something we often take for granted, was a luxury they no longer possessed. Once they arrived, captives were marched to bustling slave markets or taken directly to private residencies. Picture the scene: chaotic, loud, and utterly dehumanizing. Here, they were paraded, inspected, and sold like objects. Their worth was reduced to a price tag, negotiated by strangers who would now dictate their every move. The transaction was swift, but its consequences would last a lifetime. They were no longer individuals with dreams and aspirations. They were now someone else's possession. The process of stripping away their identity began almost immediately. First to go was their name, the very word that connected them to their past, their heritage, and their loved ones. They were given new names, often in a language they didn't understand. Names chosen by their new masters. This was a powerful tool of control, a constant reminder that their former selves were gone. Along with a new name came a new set of rules, a rigid structure that governed every minute of their day. Their lives became a series of routines they had no say in: waking up before dawn, performing grueling labor, eating what they were given, and sleeping only when permitted. Every action was dictated by the will of their owner. The concept of personal choice was completely erased. They couldn't decide what to wear, what to eat, or who to talk to. Their world shrank to the confines of a house, a workshop, or a field, and their existence became a monotonous cycle of servitude. Perhaps the most crushing aspect of this new life was the complete loss of agency over their own future. They could not leave. The walls, whether physical or psychological, were impenetrable. Any hope of returning home, of seeing their family again, was a distant, fading ember. They were trapped in a present they didn't choose and a future they couldn't shape. Every dream they once had for themselves, getting married, raising a family, pursuing a passion, was extinguished. Life in captivity varied, but the underlying reality was the same: a total lack of freedom. Some were forced into domestic service, their days filled with cooking, cleaning, and catering to every whim of the household. Others were put to work in physically demanding jobs, such as construction, farming, or mining, their bodies pushed to the limit under the harsh North African sun. There were also those forced into military service or other specialized roles, their skills exploited for the benefit of their owners. The psychological toll was immense. Living under constant threat and surveillance, with no personal space or privacy, created a state of perpetual anxiety. They had to learn a new language, new customs, and new social hierarchies just to survive. Every day was a battle to hold on to a sliver of their own identity, a secret memory of who they once were, while outwardly conforming to the demands of their new reality. The simple act of remembering their original name became an act of quiet defiance. This period in North African history, often associated with the Barbary corsairs, saw people from all over Europe and beyond fall into this devastating system. Sailors captured at sea, coastal villagers raided from their homes. Their stories are a somber testament to the fragility of freedom. It's a part of our shared human history that is crucial to remember, not to place blame, but to understand the profound impact that the loss of liberty has on the human spirit. By exploring these stories, we honor the resilience of those who endured and reaffirm our commitment to a world where Have you ever considered what it truly means to be uprooted? We often focus on the physical journey, the miles traveled, the new landscapes, the search for shelter and work. But what about the journey that happens inside? The silent, invisible struggle that unfolds in the heart and mind. For so many women who have left their homes behind, the emotional pain can be far more relentless than any physical hardship they endure. Imagine the weight of profound sadness settling in, a constant companion. It's a sadness born from missing everything that once defined you. The familiar faces of your family, the comforting rhythm of your native language, the solace of your faith, and the vibrant tapestry of your culture. It's a feeling of being adrift in a sea of strangeness, where everything is new and nothing feels like home. This isn't just a fleeting homesickness, it's a deep, aching void. With this sadness comes a pervasive fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of not being understood, fear of failure, and the fear of what the future holds for you and your loved ones. Every day presents a new set of challenges, a new test of resilience. Simple tasks, like going to the market or understanding a conversation, can become monumental hurdles, chipping away at your confidence and amplifying your sense of isolation. and the loneliness. It's a profound, hollow feeling. You can be surrounded by people in a bustling city and still feel utterly alone. The connections you once took for granted are now thousands of miles away. You miss the easy laughter with a sister, the shared secrets with a best friend, the comforting embrace of a mother. Building new relationships takes time and energy, resources that are already stretched thin just by the act of surviving each day. This loneliness creates a wall, making it even harder to reach out and connect with the new world around you. Then there's the confusion. Your entire world has been turned upside down. The rules are different, the social cues are unfamiliar, and the identity you once held so firmly seems to be slipping away. Who are you in this new place? How do you fit in without losing the core of who you are? This constant state of questioning and adaptation is mentally exhausting. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and the picture on the box is in a language you don't understand. Nights are often the hardest. When the hustle of the day subsides and silence descends, the mind has a way of wandering back. The quiet amplifies the emptiness. Memories, both sweet and bitter, come flooding back, uninvited. The scent of your mother's cooking, the sound of children playing in your old neighborhood, the melody of a song from your homeland. These memories can be a comfort, but they can also be a painful reminder of everything that has been lost. The darkness can feel like a heavy blanket, trapping you with your thoughts, your regrets, and your longing for a life that no longer exists. It's a battle fought in silence, a story of resilience that is often untold. These women carry not just their belongings, but the weight of entire worlds on their shoulders. Their strength isn't just in the physical endurance, but in the quiet, daily fight to hold on to hope amidst the overwhelming emotional turmoil. They navigate this complex inner landscape, trying to piece together a new sense of self while honoring the person they were before. Their journey is a testament to the incredible capacity of the human spirit to endure, to adapt, and to find light, even in the darkest of nights. Thank you for watching and taking the time to understand this deeper, more personal. Even when everything felt lost, a small, stubborn flame of hope refused to go out. In the quiet moments, in the shared glances, in the hushed whispers. This hope was a lifeline. For many women, the belief that they would one day return home was not just a dream. It was an anchor in a raging storm. It was the one thing that couldn't be taken from them. They held onto memories with a fierce grip, replaying scenes from their childhood like a favorite film. The warmth of a family embrace, the taste of a home-cooked meal, the sound of laughter echoing through familiar rooms. Theirs weren't just recollections. They were promises of a future waiting to be reclaimed. They were reminders of who they were before and who they could be again. This wasn't a passive waiting. It was an active, daily choice to believe. Faith, for many, became an unbreakable shield. It offered comfort when there was none to be found, and provided a wellspring of strength when their own had run dry. In the dead of night, they would whisper prayers for rescue, prayers for their families far away, prayers for the courage to face another sunrise, and prayers for a sense of inner peace amidst the chaos. These quiet appeals were acts of defiance, a spiritual resistance against the crushing weight of their circumstances. Each prayer was a thread connecting them to something larger than their suffering, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to find light in the most profound darkness. The memories they guarded so preciously were a source of incredible power. A woman might close her eyes and vividly recall the scent of rain on a summer afternoon back home, or the feeling of her mother's hand brushing her hair. Another might hum a lullaby her father used to sing, the melody a secret comfort only she understood. These sensory details were more than just nostalgia. They were proof of a life lived, a life full of love and joy. They were a constant reminder that their current reality was not the entirety of their story. By keeping these memories alive, they kept a part of themselves pure and untouched by the hardships surrounding them. It was a way of saying, this is not all I am. I am a daughter, a sister, a friend. Primera vez a hombre. And I will see it again. And this hope was contagious. It was shared in small, almost imperceptible ways. A knowing look, a gentle touch on the arm. A shared story whispered when no one was listening. When one woman's hope flickered, another would be there to help shield it from the wind. They built a silent community of resilience, their shared belief creating a bond stronger than any physical chain. They learned that hope wasn't a finite resource. It could be shared and multiplied. They drew strength not only from their own memories and faith, but from seeing that same light refusing to be extinguished in the eyes of others. They were a testament to the fact that even when stripped of everything, the will to live, to love, and to believe in a better tomorrow can persist. This unwavering belief in reunion was the ultimate act of courage. It was a refusal to surrender to despair, a declaration that their stories were not over yet. They held on to the image of walking through their front door once more, of feeling the overwhelming relief of being back where they belonged. This vision was their North Star, guiding them through the darkest nights. It fueled their resilience, gave meaning to their endurance, and fortified their spirit. While their bodies were confined, their hearts and minds traveled home every single day, keeping the path clear for the moment they could finally make that journey for real. Their story is a powerful reminder that hope is not the absence of suffering, but the choice to believe in a future beyond it. Thanks for watching. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe for more content that explores the strength of the human spirit.